Security caught Nora Bell by both arms before the cameras. Her gloves were stripped away. Her pockets were searched. Her restoration tools struck the library floor. Then Dr. Julian Mercer reached into her case and lifted a torn piece of old paper. "Here," he told the guests, "is the person asking us to believe the damage has meaning." Behind him, technicians were locking the book into a padded transport cradle. Through the open doors of the adjoining conservation suite, a thin lifting blade waited beneath task lights. Minutes earlier, the experts had agreed that someone had ruined it. A poem about rain was followed by the price of onions. A market sketch sat beside the names of women dismissed from a textile shop. The handwriting shifted from page to page, and more than 20 leaves had been torn close to the binding. Julian called it a damaged notebook with occasional literary value. Elias Wren watched his prized purchase lose its value. Nora had noticed what they ignored. She asked to examine a torn stub under angled light. Julian refused. "The assessment is finished." "No," Nora said. "The assumption is." Angled light revealed pressure marks from a missing line. Farther into the book, the thought returned in another hand. A needle marked the first version. An open square marked the completed one. Not decoration. A reply. Julian's expression hardened. "Miss Bell repairs paper. She does not interpret literature." Staff began moving the book toward the adjoining conservation suite. Nora stepped in front of the cradle. That was when security seized her. Now, Julian held the fragment from her case before the cameras. Nora's fingers closed once around empty air where her gloves had been. Then she saw the same two symbols at the fragment's edge. She raised her head. "You keep reading this as one voice." Through the open doors, the blade waited beside the first gathering. "But if you separate it tonight, no one will ever prove whose lives are inside it." 3 hours earlier, the book had rested beneath a linen cover in Elias Wren's private library. Nora arrived with Sophia Lane, her 24-year-old apprentice, carrying 2 cases, one for tools, one for documentation. At the entry desk, Celeste Arden, the purchase advisor handling insurance, security, and transport, logged both cases before allowing them into the room. The Wren manuscript, An Evening of Rediscovery. Sophia glanced at the press riser. "Private?" "Private until the headlines arrive." The book rested in a shallow cradle, its leather worn gray. Elias waited beside it and pointed to a drawing of a child's coat. Beside the sketch, a repair list noted 2 buttons, 1 cuff, and a tear beneath the left arm. 4 lines described a girl waiting outside a factory gate. "I kept returning to that page," Elias said. "No one could tell me why. Maybe it mattered to whoever wrote it." That is not what Mercer says. "I bought it because every page seemed to face a different direction." The scholars called that inconsistency. "I thought it felt like a street heard through open windows." That may be closer than inconsistency. Julian entered carrying a black folder. Julian's printed theory attributed the manuscript to an unidentified male poet from the Old Harbor. Different hands became illness, experimentation, or copying by servants. Wages, food, laundry, and ship arrivals became working notes. The poems were the true work. The torn pages were damage. 3 lines described rain across laundry ropes. A needle-shaped mark sat in the corner. 6 pages later, beside fabric prices, the same mark appeared again. Then came 3 waves beside a dock schedule, a flower beneath a market sketch, an open square beside unpaid wages. 12 repeated marks, Sophia whispered. Julian closed the book. The paper condition? Stable enough for display if the supports remain. And for separation? That was not part of the request. He placed a prepared authorization beside her log. It did not ask whether the book should be taken apart. It stated that selected leaves could be lifted in the adjoining controlled suite without unacceptable loss. Only Nora's signature was missing. She pushed it back. "I haven't made that determination. You confirmed the paper is stable." That is not the same statement. Elias watched them. Would separation damage it? It would change the evidence. "I need to document the sewing, page order, torn stubs, and relationship between the papers first." Julian checked his watch. "The formal assessment begins at 9:45. Finish quickly." Nora and Sophia documented edges, thread, stains, pressure marks, and repairs. The hands changed by schedule. Market before sunrise, dock at tide change, another after midnight. Sophia opened the files supplied by Julian's office. There are fewer edge photographs in the final report than in the intake folder. How many? 23. The missing images showed torn stubs, partial symbols, and places where one hand ended before another continued. Preserve both folders, Nora said. Across the room, two technicians rolled a padded transport cradle toward the open doors of the adjoining conservation suite. Lifting tools, linen ties, and empty archival folders waited under task lights inside. Sophia stared. They said no decision had been made. Nora counted the folders. 12. Each already carried a label. Winter wash. Market study. Harbor at dusk. Child's coat. Selected leaves. Groups 1 through 8. The decision had not merely been made, it had been organized. Julian saw her looking. Preparation is not intention. Labels usually are. Sign the authorization. Elias wanted someone practical in the room. Years earlier, Nora had stayed silent when a senior conservator claimed Lena Ortiz's discovery. Lena left the field. Now Sophia was watching what Nora would do. Nora closed the authorization without signing. I'll give you my conclusion after the examination. Then finish quickly. As he walked away, Julian spoke quietly to a security supervisor and pointed toward Nora's table. At 8:17, Celeste ordered Nora's closed tool case moved to a locked preparation room while the press platform was repositioned. The case returned 7 minutes later with a new custody tag. At 8:31, the first guests arrived. At 8:36, Nora found a torn page whose missing words had left pressure marks below. At 8:42, she found the same thought completed 30 pages later in another hand. And at 8:47, while a string quartet began beneath the balcony, Nora understood that the greatest danger to the book was no longer age, moisture, or neglect. It was the certainty of the people preparing to explain it. At 9:45, Julian Mercer stepped beneath the reading lamp as if the room had been built for him. The guests settled into two curved rows facing the display cradle. Elias stood beside the book, the printed program folded against his palm. Nora remained at the edge with Sophia. Keeping her visible let Julian claim proper procedure had been followed. Julian began with the story the room wanted. He described an educated harbor man whose poems showed restraint and whose sketches revealed a sensitive eye. Price lists and work records, he said, came from servants or household accounts. On the screen appeared the page with the child's coat. Julian cropped the image around the drawing and the 4 lines beneath it. The repair list beside the sketch was gone. The anonymous poet, he said, found lyric beauty even in poverty. Sophia shifted beside Nora. The elegant sentence protected itself. Anyone who challenged it could be accused of rejecting beauty. Julian advanced to a harbor sketch. The projection showed masts in fog, but not the dock schedule written along the lower edge. The manuscript's inconsistency reflects a mind working across many years. Illness may explain the changes in handwriting. Household assistants may have copied certain entries. Dr. Evelyn Cross, a senior literary historian seated near Julian, raised her hand. How many separate hands did your team identify? Variation does not always indicate separate authorship. Evelyn glanced at the uncropped edge thumbnails in her program, then lowered her hand. That was not the question, Nora said. Julian smiled without looking at her. Miss Bell is attentive to material differences. Literary attribution requires a broader discipline. Sophia opened the intake folder on her tablet. The first catalog draft sat beside the final version. The early description read, "The manuscript appears to preserve material contributed by multiple working hands." The final catalog said, "The manuscript preserves the working hand of an elusive poet." Sophia angled the two versions toward Nora. One letter had erased the number of people inside the book. Julian called the torn leaves evidence of careless storage. He described the needle, flower, waves, and open square as decorative marks added by later owners. Food prices and wage lists, he said, interrupted the literary material but offered useful social background. The phrase reduced dismissed women to background for a man who might never have existed. A reporter typed while Elias shifted beside the display. Julian was turning the evening into a judgment of its host. Celeste Arden approached Elias. She had arranged the purchase and now controlled the insurance, transport, and event schedule. Her priority was closing the transaction cleanly, not deciding what the book meant. The separation plan protects the strongest leaves, she said quietly. Mercer's team can issue a revised valuation by morning. Elias looked toward Nora. You said separation would change the evidence. It will. Celeste answered first. It will also prevent further loss. Individual mounting is the conservative option. That is not what conservative means here, Nora said. The decision belongs to the owner. Julian displayed 3 poems stripped of the laundry counts, bread prices, shift marks, and names around them. They now looked like one solitary voice. Julian did not need to invent evidence. He only cropped away what argued with him. Sophia compared the intake images. The missing photographs aren't random, she whispered. The omissions clustered around torn stubs and recurring symbols, the pages that complicated a single author theory. Before Nora could answer, Celeste placed a contract before Elias. The first page authorized transfer to the adjoining conservation suite and lifting of 12 selected groups. The second scheduled departure at 10:50 for an 11 secure intake, after which each group would receive a separate catalog identity. The purchase agreement also allowed Julian's advisory team to invoke emergency stabilization if they declared the object at physical risk. Nora checked the clock, 9:57. 8 minutes before the signature Julian had called a future possibility. Elias read the contract. I was told tonight was an assessment. It is, Celeste said. This preserves your options. The folders are already titled, and transport is booked. Julian ended by reading the 4 lines beneath the child's coat. Nora understood why Elias had bought it. A damaged work can still contain beauty, he said. Our responsibility is to rescue what remains. Scattered applause followed. Nora looked at the projected page. The poem was not finished there. A faint number beside the repair list matched another page written after midnight. The second page did not repeat the poem. It answered it. On the table beside Elias, Celeste uncapped a pen. Nora stepped forward. Before you sign, she said, ask him why the first catalog said hands. The question landed before Elias could touch the pen. Why did the first catalog say hands? Julian remained beside the projection screen. Because preliminary language is often imprecise. Sophia lifted the tablet. It was not imprecise. It was plural. Celeste stepped toward her. That file is internal. It was included in the conservation packet, Nora said. That makes it part of the object's documented history. Miss Bell has identified material variations. What she lacks is the training to distinguish collaboration from contamination, authorship from later handling, and intention from accident. Then explain the sequence. What sequence? The marks, the work hours, the pressure traces from removed leaves, the thought repeated in another hand. You are building a literary theory from stains and torn paper. I'm asking you not to destroy the evidence before anyone tests it. Celeste moved the contract closer to Elias. The strongest pages will be stabilized individually. Once you separate them, their order becomes your interpretation, Nora said. The book stops being evidence and becomes a selection. Elias glanced at the 12 labeled folders. Were these groups chosen before tonight? Julian answered carefully. The most significant leaves were identified during review. Before Nora completed her examination, the timing does not alter their condition. It alters your conclusion, Nora said. Julian turned to the guests. This is why professional boundaries matter. A conservator preserves material. She does not create a theory that increases her own importance. The insult reached farther than a raised voice. Nora felt the old reflex. Say less, protect the contract, survive the room. She had once let Lena Ortiz's discovery disappear to keep an exhibition on schedule. Nora faced Elias. Do not sign until the full intake record is reviewed by someone who did not prepare the sale. Julian nodded once toward the security supervisor. Before the guards moved, Celeste opened Nora's condition file. There is another issue. She placed a custody sheet beside the contract. A tiny detached fiber sample had been logged during Nora's afternoon examination and temporarily stored in her tool case for comparison. Julian read the custody line aloud. You removed material from the manuscript. With authorization. The fragment was already detached beneath the cradle. Sophia photographed it in place. Where is the receipt? Nora reached for the file, but the carbon copy was gone. Sophia checked the digital folder. The photograph remains, but its upload time changed. Celeste addressed the guests. We have missing material, incomplete custody documentation, and a conservator advancing a theory that depends on torn pages. That fragment is smaller than a fingernail, Nora said. It did not come from any missing leaf. Julian walked to the tool case Celeste had returned from the preparation room. Then you will not object to an inspection. I object to you handling conservation materials without gloves. The security supervisor opened the case on the inspection table. Nora moved toward him. Do not disturb the order. 2 guards blocked her. The first tray contained brushes, bone folders, thread, blotting sheets, and a magnifier. The supervisor tipped it too sharply. Tools slid across the floor. A slim brush struck the display cradle. Nora flinched. It had belonged to the conservator who trained her. Then, Julian reached beneath a packet of tissue and lifted a torn piece of old paper, large enough to hold 2 lines of writing. Nora had never seen it. Julian held it by the blank edge. A needle and an open square marked the margin. Julian allowed the guests to form the accusation before he spoke. Here is the person asking us to believe the damage has meaning. That was placed in my case, Nora said. The guards caught her by both arms. Release her, Sophia said. Celeste stepped between Sophia and Elias. Until custody is clarified, Miss Bell cannot remain near the object. One guard pulled off Nora's gloves. The other searched her jacket. Her certification badge came loose, and Julian took it before it fell. You were hired to protect the paper, he said. Not turn uncertainty into a career. Nora looked at him. The folders were labeled before the assessment. The transport was booked before your decision. That accusation was ready before they searched me. A guard began directing her toward the doors. Angled light crossed the fragment, revealing pressure marks beneath the unfinished line. The open square completed the sentence the needle had begun. Nora stopped resisting. Do not let them move the book, she told Elias. Celeste uncapped the pen again. Julian placed Nora's badge beside the contract. Elias looked at the fragment, the prepared folders, and the open doors to the conservation suite where the lifting blade waited. Then he looked away. Remove her, he said. The guards did not take Nora outside. They left her in a narrow service corridor behind the East Library, beneath a brass wall clock, 10:02 p.m. Through the closed doors, applause rose and faded. Nora could not hear Julian's words, but she knew what would follow. He would call speed preservation and make a controlled room sound safer than delay. Sophia appeared through the side door carrying the documentation case. One guard stepped forward. She is not to receive materials. These are my files, Sophia said. Her voice held until the guard looked directly at her. Nora saw the fear beneath it. Sophia's scholarship, recommendation, and first museum placement all depended on people inside that room. Go back, Nora said. You told me to preserve both folders. I also told you not to lose your future over mine. That isn't what you taught me. Sophia set the case on a service cart. I copied the intake images before they locked the network. Nora kept her hands visible. Show me only what is already on your screen. Sophia opened the missing edge photographs in their original order. They began with the torn stub beside the fragment Julian had displayed. Under normal light, it looked like damage. Rough fibers, an interrupted line, a narrow remnant caught near the sewing. Sophia increased the side contrast. Letters emerged from pressure rather than ink. By morning, the rain had learned our names. The line ended where the leaf had been torn. 30 pages later, beneath the open square symbol, another hand had written, By morning, the rain knew every roof but ours. Sophia read both lines twice. The second one isn't copying it. No, it is answering the attempt. They checked another stub. A partial flower cart sketch had pressed its outline into the next sheet. Farther on, The flower symbol appeared beside a finished market scene drawn from another angle. A third missing leaf left the beginning of a wage list. Later, another hand reorganized the same names by household instead of factory. 3 examples don't prove a system, Sophia said. No. But they tell us where to look. The torn leaves were not scattered evenly. They appeared before passages with stronger structure or clearer information. A discarded line became a poem. A rough sketch became a scene. A list became a record of who had children, who had lost work, and who had shared rent. The missing pages were not random absences. They were revisions. A woman in a charcoal dress entered carrying an archival box. Iris Moore managed Elias's private library. During the afternoon, she had spoken only when asked and corrected anyone who called the manuscript a notebook without checking the catalog. Now, she looked at the guards. Mr. Wren requested the 1,968 dealer photographs. He did? Nora asked. No, Iris said, but he should have. Inside were black and white images taken decades before Elias bought the book. The same torn stubs were visible along the spine. Iris pointed to a dated inventory card. 21 missing leaves recorded in 1968. 2 more noted in 1974. None reported lost after that. Sophia compared the old photographs with the current images. The tiers matched in position and fiber pattern. One remnant carried a triangular notch beside the thread. Another held the same dark spot embedded in the paper. The Danica Julian had placed at Nora's feet had existed before she was born. Why wasn't this in his report? Sophia asked. He requested the literary file, not the full acquisition archive, Iris said. He knew the archive existed? He signed the access ledger. A second message followed, addressed to Nora. Julian's office had notified 2 museums and the Regional Conservation Board that material might have been removed during her examination. No finding had been made, but the warning alone could freeze every active contract in her workshop. Sophia's phone vibrated. A message from the Mercer Institute suspended her fellowship recommendation pending review of unauthorized document handling. She read it without moving. Nora remembered Lena Ortiz holding evidence no one wanted and herself choosing a contract over the truth. This time, the same choice had arrived wearing Sophia's name. You can stop, Nora said. Sophia closed the message. No. Inside the library, a chair scraped. Then, Elias's voice carried through the door. Bring me the authorization. Nora checked the clock. 10:07. The signature deadline had passed, but the book had not yet been transferred. Iris turned over one photograph. A dealer had written on the back. Torn leaves appear original to the period of use. Later passages may respond to removed drafts. Take this to Elias, Nora told the guards. Neither moved. Iris lifted the box. I work for him, and this belongs to his library. Before she reached the door, Julian appeared. He saw the photographs in her hands. For 1 second, he did not look angry. He looked prepared. Those images have no bearing on authorship, he said. Nora studied him. She had expected denial. Instead, he had already chosen his next argument. That meant he had seen them before. Julian stepped into the corridor and closed the library door behind him. Those photographs prove only that the tiers are old, he said. Age does not create intention. Nora looked at the brass clock above his shoulder. 10:09. Then let us test intention. You are no longer authorized to examine the manuscript. I do not need to touch it. Sophia held up the copied image set. We have the sequence. Julian's eyes moved to the notice suspending her fellowship recommendation. You are making a costly choice, Miss Lane. So are you. He left without answering. Iris unlocked a catalog room across the corridor. Nora spread the intake photographs in order while Sophia opened a blank timeline. They began with pages that carried explicit times. Before dawn, flower prices appeared beside the needle symbol. At first bell, flower deliveries appeared beside a 5-petal mark. Near noon, garment counts and missing wages appeared beside 2 crossed strokes. At the change of tide, cargo tallies appeared beside 3 waves. After children's supper, an open square appeared beside notes about shoes, fevers, and rent. Near midnight, A printer's block accompanied rewritten lines and corrected spellings. The handwriting did not simply change. It arrived according to work. Sophia created 12 columns. Do not name them as people yet, Nora said. Name the pattern. They labeled the columns by recurring conditions: flower, flowers, cloth, wash water, children, print, school, dock, kitchen fire, street trade, night lodging, and transfer. 9 hands used female self-reference or addressed one another as women. Transfer notes identified the remaining 3 as the woman at the flower stall, the woman working the dock ledger, and the woman who kept the night press. Iris brought the acquisition transcript. The manuscript had been found in a sealed trunk from a lodging house near the old harbor. The sale listing called it a gentleman poet's notebook because one front page carried a formal male name. Nora examined the image. The name had been written later. The ink sat differently in the paper, and the page bore none of the recurring marks. A later owner, Iris said. Or someone who wanted the book to look owned. Celeste appeared with the transport manager. Mr. Wren has delayed signing, she said. He has not cancelled removal. My crew must depart by 10:50 to reach secure intake by 11, the manager said. Mr. Wren has delayed signing, Celeste continued. The 11 o'clock intake has not moved. Sophia returned to the timeline. One handwriting pattern appeared where it should not. The open square hand showed up near children's notes in the afternoon, then again after midnight beside revised poems. That breaks the schedule, Sophia said. Unless it served a different role. The letter forms match. Nora studied the page order. The open square often appeared beside lines begun under another symbol. It also appeared near stitched repairs, page numbers, and instructions such as leave this after market or give next to the schoolroom. It moved the book, Nora said. Iris leaned closer. The 12th person carried it between them. That explained why her writing crossed the other clocks. She was not evidence against the pattern. She made the pattern possible. Sophia labeled the final column, transfer hand. A day no official history had recorded began to form. Before sunrise, one hand noted flower prices. At noon, another listed women dismissed from a textile room. Near the tide change, a dock worker recorded families waiting for wages. After midnight, the transfer hand revised a line about hunger. The pages were shifts handing the day to one another. Elias entered alone and looked at the 12 columns. You have 7 minutes, he said. Nora pointed to the child's coat page. The repair list was written before noon. The poem beneath it was completed after midnight by another hand. Julian separated them in his presentation, but the page does not. You are saying 12 women wrote this? I am saying 12 recurring hands are tied to women's work, self-reference, and transfer instructions. We still have to prove they shaped one work. And if you cannot, keep the book intact until someone can. That does not recover what I paid. No, it protects what you bought. Equipment wheels crossed the marble floor outside. Mercer says delay will turn uncertainty into scandal, Elias said. It already is one. The question is whether you bought a damaged book or nearly destroyed something no one had understood. Sophia enlarged the pages around the textile list. The same 5 names appeared later beneath 3 symbols. Once beside rent owed, once beside children needing shoes, and once beside food divided among households. A list Julian had called background was being carried forward by several writers. They were tracking one another, Iris said. Not just events, Nora replied. Consequences. At 10:18, the open square appeared beside a sentence in a cramped hand. Give this next to the woman who keeps the night press. She will know how to finish it. Elias read it twice. Then Julian's voice came from the doorway. 7 minutes are over. 2 technicians waited behind him with the padded cradle. Nora gathered the timeline. No, she said. We have just found the clock. Julian entered the catalog room with the technicians behind him. You found a schedule, he said. That does not make a book. Nora held the timeline against the table. No, but it tells us where to look. Elias stood between Julian and the waiting cradle. You said 7 minutes. I also said the decision was mine. Julian glanced at the clock. Every delay increases the chance of further loss. Then give her 10 minutes to prove there is something to lose. Celeste objected first. The revised valuation could not be issued until the selected leaves were separated. Reporters were already asking whether Elias had overpaid. Elias did not look at her. 10 minutes. Nora chose a cluster of pages Julian had separated across 4 proposed folders: Harbor at Dusk, Winter Wash, Selected Verse, and Labor Notes. On their own, they appeared unrelated. Together, they covered one day. The first entry came from the kitchen fire column shortly before dawn. It recorded a shortage of flour and a smell of smoke moving inland from the textile quarter. An hour later, the flour mark writer described ash settling on white petals before the market opened. Near noon, the crossed strokes hand listed 5 women dismissed from the textile room. Beside one name, someone had added, "Husband injured, 2 children, rent Friday." Julian interrupted. Shared news does not establish design. Nora moved to the dock pages. At the change of tide, the 3-wave writer noted that a cargo crew had abandoned unloading to run toward Bells near the factory street. A page Julian classified as household clutter recorded 12 bowls, 2 loaves, and all the onions left in the pot. "Food after a fire," Iris said. "Or food on any difficult day," Julian replied. Nora placed the pages in time order. The caretaker's open square hand wrote that 3 children arrived without coats. The schoolroom hand listed 6 names absent the next morning. The night press writer recorded that a relief notice would be printed without charge. No single page explained the event. Each writer held one part of it. Sophia enlarged the torn stubs surrounding the cluster. The first missing leaf had carried a rough line about smoke. Its pressure marks ended halfway through a sentence. Later, beneath the needle symbol, the line returned as, "Smoke took the roof before it learned our names." Still later, under the printer's block, another hand changed it. "Fire took the roof. The street kept every name." Elias read the 2 versions aloud. The second line was not a copy. It answered the first by changing what survived. Nora pointed to the repair list beside the child's coat. The coat belonged to one of the names on the schoolroom page. The girl waiting outside the factory gate also appeared in the food count, the rent list, and the note about children arriving without coats. "The page you bought this book for," Nora said, "is part of the same day." Elias looked toward the manuscript beyond the open door. Julian stepped closer. "You have created a narrative by rearranging fragments." "Keepes?" "No," Sophia said. "We restored the order you removed." She displayed the sewing diagram. The leaves from Julian's 4 proposed folders belonged to one continuous gathering. Their thread holes, stains, and offsets matched. Removing the pages by category would not preserve the book. It would erase the sequence. Elias touched the unsigned authorization. Julian saw the movement. Even if your sequence is correct, it remains a communal notebook. Records are not literature merely because suffering connects them. Nora looked at the projected line about the fire. "No, but revision is." She showed the torn drafts, repeated images, altered lines, and the way practical entries became scenes elsewhere in the gathering. One writer supplied the event. Another changed its language. A third connected it to a person already named. The book was not simply recording life. It was shaping memory together. Julian stopped correcting her terminology. He attacked her motive. "You want this to be collaboration because you need it to repair your own history." Elias looked between them. "What does that mean?" Julian opened the conservation board notice and named Lena Ortiz, the assistant Nora had once failed to defend. Nora did not deny it. The old silence entered the room before Julian explained it. Julian turned toward the guests gathering near the doorway. "She is not interpreting this object. She is confessing through it." Nora faced Elias. "My failure does not make these pages less connected. It only tells you why I will not stay quiet again." A transport case rolled into view behind Julian. Celeste checked the time, 10:27. The crew had secured the glass cover and positioned the padded cradle for transfer into the adjoining suite. Nora looked back at the sequence they had rebuilt. The mystery was no longer whether several hands had touched the book. It was whether Julian had known they were speaking to one another before he cut their voices apart. At 10:28 p.m., Julian stopped arguing about the book. He began arguing about Nora. Guests gathered at the catalog room threshold, drawn by the transport crew and Elias standing beside an unsigned order. Julian held up the Conservation Board notice. Miss Bell has presented herself as a defender of forgotten contributors, he said. Years ago, she watched a senior conservator absorb Lena Ortiz's discovery, signed the final record, and kept working. Now, she has built a theory that lets her correct that past in public. Elias asked if it was true. Nora answered, I protected my first contract instead of her name. That failure is real. It does not alter the sewing, the images, or the writing. Julian replied, then we agree that her judgment is compromised. No, Nora said. We agree that silence can erase a person even when every document is technically complete. Julian turned toward Elias. This is not a hearing on her character. It is a decision about preserving your property. Behind him, technicians secured the glass cover and rolled the padded cradle toward the adjoining conservation suite. Sophia moved to stop them. Celeste blocked her path. Your access has been suspended. I'm not touching the book. You are interfering with authorized handling. Iris stepped beside Sophia. There is no signed authorization. Celeste showed a second document. Elias's expression changed. What is that? Emergency Stabilization Authority, she said. Your purchase agreement permits the advisory team to act if continued display presents a material risk. Nora looked at the document. The risk box had already been checked. The time beside Julian's signature was 8:52 p.m., nearly an hour before the formal assessment. You declared an emergency before you told him the book was damaged, Nora said. Julian did not look at the page. I anticipated the likely finding. You manufactured the authority to act before anyone could disagree. The transport supervisor hesitated. Julian pointed toward the manuscript. Proceed. The first technician reached for the linen ties. Elias stepped between them. No one transfers this book or lifts a gathering until... I understand why that form was... Julian recovered quickly. The timeline is administrative. The material condition is not. Nora turned to Sophia. Show the intake edges. Celeste seized the tablet before Sophia could unlock it. This device contains proprietary review material. The files belong to Elias's archive, Iris said. They were generated by Mercer's team. They document his property. While they argued, Nora noticed Julian's black folder lying open beside the projection controls. A page inside carried thumbnail images of the manuscript's edges, not the cropped final set. The complete sequence. 23 images marked in red. Beside, several were handwritten notes. Conflicts with solitary hand. Retain for internal review. Remove from public deck. Nora did not touch the folder. She read the nearest line aloud. Julian closed it. Too late. Elias had seen the markings. You knew, he said. I knew there were anomalies. You removed them from the presentation. I removed material that would confuse non-specialists before proper interpretation. And your interpretation was already printed. Julian's jaw tightened. My responsibility was to give form to an object that otherwise had none. There it was, not greed alone. Authority. He believed the book became meaningful only after passing through him. Nora looked toward the manuscript. Those pages had form. You cut the evidence into categories because the whole contradicted you. Julian faced the guests again. Even if multiple contributors existed, anonymous household entries do not become literature through repetition. A recognized work requires coherence, intention, and authorship. Then why were you afraid to show the edges? Sophia asked. He ignored her. Celeste signaled the transport crew. Move the manuscript to the secure room. The owner can review the decision after stabilization. Elias reached for the emergency form. Julian covered it with his hand. The gesture was small. It told Elias who Julian believed was in charge. Elias pulled the paper free. At 10:34, the transport supervisor received a new call. The private storage facility would accept the shipment only if the manuscript arrived before 11. After that, the intake team would leave. Celeste lowered her voice. If we miss the window, the revised insurance coverage does not activate. The financial trap tightened around Elias. Nora saw him calculating the cost of delay against the cost of being wrong. Julian saw it too. He placed Nora's confiscated badge on top of the emergency form. Choose the judgment of every expert you invited, he said, or the theory of a conservator who has already admitted she uses silence and regret according to convenience. Nora looked at the badge. Then she looked at Elias. Do not choose me. Julian almost smiled. Choose the evidence he removed. A voice came from behind the guests. I saw those images before tonight. Dr. Evelyn Cross stood near the library doors, pale and rigid. Julian turned toward her. She did not continue. Not yet. But she had said enough to stop the technicians from moving. Doctor. Evelyn Cross remained near the library doors while every face turned toward her. Julian's hand was still resting on the emergency form. What exactly did you see? Elias asked. Evelyn took one step forward. The complete intake sequence, she said. All 23 edge photographs. The recurring marks. The changes in hand. Julian's voice stayed measured. You saw preliminary material without context. I saw enough to ask whether the manuscript had more than one contributor. And I told you the variations were later additions. You told me they were inconvenient. The transport crew waited beside the cradle. No one touched it. Evelyn looked at Nora, then away. I should have insisted on a second review. I did not. Julian's expression changed only at the eyes. You are revising your memory in response to a public disturbance. No, Evelyn said. I am correcting the record because I helped leave it incomplete. The admission did not make her brave. It made her look older. She had spent 30 years building a career beside Julian's. Her name appeared in his acknowledgments, his conference panels, and the fellowship letters that shaped younger scholars' futures. Disagreeing now would not erase that history. It would expose it. Sophia unlocked her tablet. I have the original image set, the final image set, and the file history showing when the crops were made. Celeste moved toward her. You were instructed not to distribute internal material. I am not distributing it. I am entering it into the owner's review. You no longer have access. Iris placed the acquisition archive on Elias's desk. She has my authorization. Celeste stared at her. Since when? Since I remembered that managing a library means more than keeping people from touching the shelves. Iris opened a thin folder Nora had not seen before. Inside was the first catalog draft. The sentence appeared exactly as Sophia had shown it. The manuscript appears to preserve material contributed by multiple working hands. Below it, in Julian's handwriting, were 3 words. Too diffuse. Simplify attribution. Elias read them twice. Julian spoke before he could respond. Catalog language is refined constantly. That is not deception. 10:39 p.m. The transport supervisor checked the route time. If the cradle was not moving by 10:45, the team would miss the 11 o'clock secure intake. Celeste leaned close to Elias. If the manuscript misses tonight's transfer, the temporary coverage expires. You will carry the full risk until a new policy is issued. Elias looked at the book through the open doors. I almost signed because I did not want this room to believe I had been fooled. No one answered. He rubbed the unsigned line with his thumb. I heard Mercer call the ordinary pages clutter, and I let embarrassment make that sound reasonable. Nora did not rescue him from the admission. That is how these pages nearly disappeared, she said. Not because no one saw them, because the people who saw them decided another explanation was safer. Sophia looked at Nora. And Lena Ortiz? The question was quiet, but it belonged in the same record. Nora answered without turning away. I saw what happened to her work. I protected my contract instead of her name. I cannot change that by being right tonight. Then why should anyone trust you now? Julian asked. They should not trust me because I regret it. Nora pointed to the photographs, the catalog draft, the sewing diagram, and the repeated symbols. They should test the evidence because regret did not create any of this. Elias looked toward the technicians. How long do you need? 10 minutes with the book left intact, the projection screen, and every image restored to its original frame. You have 6. Then give me 6. Julian stepped between Nora and the library. You are allowing a conservator to stage a performance. Evelyn faced him. No, we already watched yours. The transport supervisor began closing the empty case. Celeste stopped him. Wait. Until then, she had protected every step of the transaction. At 10:41, Elias carried the unsigned authorization back into the East Library. Nora followed without her gloves, her badge, or permission from the man who had taken both. She no longer needed Julian to recognize her role. She needed 6 minutes to make the book recognizable to everyone else. Nora stood beside the projection screen while Elias placed the unsigned authorization on the reading table. "You have 6 minutes," Elias said. Julian addressed the guests first. "This is an interpretation assembled under pressure by a suspended conservator with incomplete custody records and a personal reason to imagine erased contributors. Notebooks pass through households. Owners add marks. Torn leaves indicate loss. None of that creates authorship or intention." Nora turned to Elias. "Display the page with the child's coat exactly as it appears in the intake image." Iris restored the uncropped page, the coat sketch, repair list, needle mark, and faint number at the fold. The next image showed flower prices, a dock schedule, and children absent from school. "These were presented as unrelated notes," Nora said. "They are not." Before dawn, market opening. Noon, tide change. Supper, midnight press. 12 recurring hands appear according to 12 working lives. 9 identify themselves or one another as women. Transfer notes direct the book to the woman at the flower stall, the woman working the dock ledger, and the woman who keeps the night press. Julian raised one hand. "Pattern recognition is not proof." "No, sequence is." Sophia projected the sewing diagram. 4 pages Julian had divided into separate folders belonged to one continuous gathering. Their thread holes aligned, stains crossed the inner folds, and pressure from one missing leaf continued into the next sheet. On the screen, the factory fire sequence moved from smoke before dawn to ash at market, dismissed workers at noon, children without coats at dusk, and a relief notice after midnight. No page told the whole story. Together, they did. Shared events produce records. Records are not automatically art. That is why the torn pages matter. Iris dimmed the lights, revealing pressure traces from the torn drafts. By morning, the rain had learned our names. 30 pages later, another hand revised it. By morning, the rain knew every roof but ours. After the factory fire, a third version appeared. Fire took the roof. The street kept every name. Nora placed the 3 versions side by side. One person began the thought. Another changed it. A third carried it into a later event. She returned to the child's coat, whose girl reappeared in the school record, food count, and poem Elias loved. A practical entry became character, memory, then verse. "The household notes are not clutter around the literature," Nora said. "They are how the literature was made." Julian's restraint began to slip. "You cannot identify these people. Not by full name, not yet. Then you cannot call them authors. That is not the standard you used for your anonymous male poet. You gave one unnamed man authorship because the theory was elegant," Evelyn said. "She has shown 12 recurring hands, stable symbols, revision, and a continuous sewn sequence. You demanded less proof for the man you invented." Iris displayed the first report. Multiple working hands. Beneath it was Julian's instruction. Too diffuse. Simplify attribution. Julian faced Elias. "You purchased this manuscript under my assessment. Accept this theory, and you admit the acquisition was built on uncertainty." Elias looked toward the ordinary page with the coat. "I bought it because of the uncertainty. You were the one who promised certainty." Julian pointed to the waiting folders. "Even if they wrote together, the object remains damaged. Separation protects the strongest material." Sophia projected the folder titles. Winter wash removed the fire's beginning. Harbor at dusk its middle. Labor notes the dismissed women. Selected verse preserved only the polished lines. The plan did not save the strongest pages. It removed what made them meaningful. Sophia opened Nora's conservation log. Every photograph, measurement, and observation carried 2 names, Nora Bell and Sophia Lane. "She never called my work assistants," Sophia said. "She recorded what I found." Julian dismissed it as sentiment. Sophia looked toward the cropped report bearing only his name. "No. It is a chain of authorship." You taught this room to recognize one only when it belonged to you. The transport supervisor checked his watch. 10:46. We need a decision. Julian placed the pen before Elias. Delay means assuming the insurance risk yourself. Nora did not approach the document. Do not choose me. Choose whether you want the book you bought or 12 attractive fragments someone else has explained for you. Elias picked up the pen. Then he drew a line through the authorization. The nib tore the paper. No separation, no transfer, no private catalog identities. Julian stared at the cancelled order. This is reckless. Reckless was agreeing to cut first and understand later. The technicians stepped away. Nora turned back to the manuscript and projected the 12 symbols with their hours and entries. The pattern was a record of 12 women whose labor shaped every hour of the district. A seamstress, cook, laundress, flower seller, printer, caretaker, dock worker, and teacher. 4 others still required study. They had not observed the city from a distant window. They had fed it, cleaned it, printed its notices, mended its clothes, carried its cargo, taught its children, and recorded what official histories ignored. Elias looked at the onion prices. What do we call it? Nora studied the torn edges and revisions passed from hand to hand. Until we know their names, we call it what they left us. The Book of Ordinary Days. Julian stood beside the crossed-out authorization with Nora's badge near his hand. He opened his mouth, then saw Evelyn, the uncropped images, and the cameras still recording. For the first time that night, he had no interpretation ready. He did not apologize. The book had already corrected him. 3 months later, the East Library no longer displayed the manuscript beneath glass. It rested in a public conservation room at Elias Wren's city archive, visible through a wide window as researchers worked around one table. The book had not been separated. Its temporary insurance policy had been replaced. Its catalog record no longer named an imagined harbor poet. Until the contributors could be identified with greater certainty, the title read, The Book of Ordinary Days. A collaborative manuscript in 12 hands. Julian was removed from the project and suspended from new attributions while earlier reports were reviewed. Some colleagues still called his choices editing rather than concealment. The uncropped images, altered catalog, and pre-signed emergency form remained in the permanent review record. Evelyn Cross published a correction under her own name. It included the sentence she had avoided for years. Uncertainty did not justify replacing many possible lives with one convenient author. Elias funded the research, surrendered control over its conclusions, and signed a public access agreement. Ownership no longer meant deciding what everyone else was allowed to see. The research team confirmed that all 12 contributors were women through self-reference and transfer instructions, but only 8 occupational patterns could be described with confidence: the needle, waves, flower, press block, open square, school marks, kitchen tallies, and wash counts. Their full names remained unresolved. Nora insisted that blank spaces were more honest than invented answers, even when donors complained that an unfinished label looked less impressive. Nora's certification was restored after the custody review reconstructed the 7-minute gap Celeste had created at 8:17. Door access records showed a Mercer Institute coordinator entering the locked preparation room with the fragment packet. The coordinator later admitted placing the leaf beneath Nora's tissue stack. Celeste was removed from future Wren acquisitions for violating custody protocol, though investigators found no proof she knew what the coordinator intended. 2 museums reopened their contracts with Nora's workshop, a third did not. The loss mattered. It simply did not end her work. Sophia's fellowship recommendation was reinstated, though she declined the Mercer Institute placement. She remained with Nora and helped build a training program in collaborative documentation. Every photograph carried the name of the person who made it. Every observation carried the name of the person who noticed it. The rule sounded small until people understood how often history had been built by removing precisely those lines. Nora also wrote to Lena Ortiz. The first letter received no answer, neither did the second. The third returned with one sentence. I believe you now. I am not ready to forgive you. Nora kept the letter in her desk without treating it as absolution. On opening morning, reporters expected the manuscript's finest poem or harbor drawing. Nora chose a different page. It contained the price of bread, a sketch of a child's sleeve, 4 names beside unpaid wages, and 6 lines written in 3 distinct hands. One edge remained visibly torn. The missing portion had not been recreated. No decorative repair disguised the gap. A narrow support protected the fibers while leaving the history legible. Sophia placed a fresh pair of conservation gloves beside Nora. Before putting them on, Nora opened the new treatment record. She wrote Sophia Lane on the first line. Then, Iris Moore. Then, the names of the paper specialist, imaging technician, research assistant, and catalog editor who had helped preserve the sequence. At the bottom, Nora left 12 blank lines. A child watching through the window raised her hand even though no lesson had begun. Who wrote that page? Nora looked at the 3 inks crossing one another. 3 people wrote what remains. The child pointed toward the torn edge. Is the rest lost? Nora studied the pressure marks where one unfinished thought had once waited for another hand. Some words are, she said. Then she put on the gloves. But the way they wrote together is still here.